Okay, so you want to own a mansion. You're on the couch with a real estate app open, swiping through houses you will never be pre-approved for. Buy a huge house, put a gate at the end of the driveway, invite people over. That's the plan. It looks like the ultimate finish line, the thing you get once you've made it, the physical proof that you don't have to worry about money anymore. Here's the problem. A mansion isn't really an asset in the way people think of assets. A stock pays you a dividend. A rental property pays you rent. A mansion pays you nothing. It's a business you accidentally started that has no customers, no revenue, and a fixed set of costs that show up every single month whether you're happy with your purchase or not. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the wealthiest people in the world treat owning one as a calculated financial strategy, while others go broke trying to keep one afloat. There are three real tiers of this, and the gap between them isn't just size. It's what kind of financial commitment you're actually signing up for. Tier 1 is the regional luxury mansion, 8,000 to 12,000 square feet in an upscale suburb or secondary market. Price range, $2 million to $5 million. This gets you a large lot, a pool, maybe a home theater and a wine cellar, but it's still a house on a normal residential street, subject to the same zoning and HOA rules as everyone else's. This is the tier most people picture when they imagine making it, and it's also the tier where the math is the most forgiving because the buyer pool is still relatively large if you ever need to sell. For reference, the down payment alone on Tier 1 is more than most people make in a decade, so if you're doing math on your phone right now, you can put it away. Tier 2 is the ultra-prime trophy home, waterfront or hillside in a market like the Hamptons, Miami, or Los Angeles. 15,000 to 25,000 square feet, built with imported materials and amenities most people never see in person. A private dock, a home theater with a real projection booth, a wine room built to preserve a seven-figure collection. Price range, $20 million to $50 million. At this tier, you're no longer just buying square footage, you're buying scarcity, because there are only so many waterfront lots in any given city. Tier 3 is the mega mansion, sometimes called a spec compound, 30,000 plus square feet, its own zip code's worth of amenities, multiple guest houses, a private spa, sometimes an underground parking gallery for a car collection, built as a statement rather than a home. These routinely list for $100 million to $250 million, and some of the biggest players in this tier don't even live in the house. They build it purely to sell to someone else, treating the entire mansion as a piece of speculative inventory. And at every tier, the listing price is never the real number. Closing costs alone typically run 2% to 5% of the purchase price. On a $30 million home, that's up to $1.5 million before you've moved in a single box. Most buyers at the trophy tier also renovate before moving in, even on a home that's already finished, because the previous owner's taste rarely matches the new owner's. And a light renovation on a mansion this size routinely runs into seven figures on its own. But the purchase price is just the entry fee. The first cost nobody mentions is property tax, and at this scale, it stops being a rounding error. In most high-value markets, that's 1% to 2% of assessed value every year. On a $50 million mansion, that's $500,000 to $1 million a year. Before you've spent a dollar on anything else, and before the county's next reassessment potentially pushes that number even higher, that's more than your entire lifetime earnings so far, paid every 12 months, just so the county lets you keep the house. The second cost is staffing and maintenance, and it compounds fast. The standard rule of thumb in the industry is that annual upkeep runs 1% to 4% of the home's value. Landscaping, pool service, HVAC on a building the size of a hotel, roof and structural maintenance on materials that cost more to source than they did to install. Add a household staff, housekeeper, groundskeeper, security, maybe a private chef, and a large estate can run $500,000 to $2 million a year in payroll alone. None of that shows up in the listing price, and almost none of it is optional once you own a property this size, because a 25,000 square foot house left unmaintained deteriorates fast enough to actively destroy its own value. The third cost is insurance, and in certain markets it's become the cost that actually decides whether ownership is viable at all. In wildfire or flood-prone luxury markets, insurers have started dropping high-value properties entirely, forcing owners onto surplus lines coverage that can run several times the cost of a standard policy, sometimes $100,000 or more a year, just for basic fire and liability coverage on a single trophy property. A mansion that looked affordable on paper 5 years ago can become financially strained today purely because the insurance market changed underneath it, with no changes to the house itself. The fourth cost is one most first-time buyers don't even think to ask about: liability exposure. A property this size, often with a pool, a dock, or recreational features, creates real legal risk if a guest or staff member is injured on site. That's why most trophy properties aren't held in an individual's name at all. They're held inside an LLC or a trust, which adds its own layer of ongoing legal and accounting fees, typically $10,000 to $30,000 a year, just to maintain the structure that protects the owner from being personally sued over an accident on their own property. Stack all four of those together on a $40 million Tier 2 property, and you're looking at somewhere around $1.1 million a year just to keep the lights on. Property tax, insurance, staffing, and maintenance, and the legal structure around it. That's before a single dollar of appreciation, rental income, or resale value enters the picture. It's a number that exists whether the house is occupied 365 days a year or sits empty, and it's the number most first-time buyers at this level radically underestimate before they sign. Here's the part that actually matters. How does anyone make this math work? A mansion doesn't generate income like a business does, but the ultra-wealthy don't treat it like a pure cost center either. There are three real mechanics at play, and understanding them is the difference between owning a mansion strategically and owning one that quietly bleeds you dry. The first is appreciation in a scarce market. Trophy properties in supply-constrained luxury markets can appreciate 4% to 8% a year in a strong cycle. And because there's a genuinely limited number of true trophy-tier properties in any given market, you can't just build more waterfront in a city that's already built out. Prices at the very top can move independently of the broader housing market. When the regular housing market softens, ultra-prime real estate sometimes barely notices because the buyer pool at that level isn't relying on a mortgage tied to average interest rates. The second is the buy, borrow, die strategy, and it's one of the most important mechanics in wealthy real estate ownership generally. Instead of selling a mansion to access its value, which triggers a capital gains tax bill, owners borrow against it instead. Banks will lend against the equity in a trophy property at relatively low interest rates, sometimes below 5%, and that borrowed money isn't taxed as income because a loan isn't income. The mansion becomes collateral, not inventory, and the owner gets to spend against the value of the house without ever technically selling it or triggering a taxable event. When the property eventually passes to heirs, in many cases the cost basis resets entirely, meaning decades of appreciation can pass down without ever being taxed as a capital gain at all. There's also a smaller but real tax mechanic sitting underneath all of this. Mortgage interest on a primary residence is deductible up to a certain loan size, and property tax paid is partially deductible as well. It's nowhere near enough to offset the full cost of owning a $40 million home, but it shaves a real percentage off the effective carrying cost every single year, and owners who structure their financing correctly factor that in from day one rather than treating it as an afterthought. You, meanwhile, get a much smaller version of this called hoping your tax refund covers the credit card bill. The third is event and production rental. A genuine trophy property, especially one with striking architecture or a notable location, can be rented out for weddings, corporate events, or film and photo shoots for $10,000 to $100,000 a day. It doesn't come close to offsetting the full carrying costs on its own. A handful of rental days a year isn't going to cover $1 million plus annual cost load, but on a slow year, it's genuinely the difference between a six-figure loss and a seven-figure one. And it's why some ultra-prime properties are managed almost like a small hospitality business on the side. The fourth mechanic only applies at the very top, but it's the one that actually makes Tier 3 make sense: spec development. Remember, some mega mansion builders never intend to live in the house at all. They buy the land, finance the build, and treat the entire project like a $150 million product launch aimed at a buyer pool of maybe a few dozen people worldwide. When it works, the margins can be enormous because the finished product is genuinely one of one. When it doesn't, when the house finishes construction and sits unsold for 2 or 3 years while carrying costs pile up in the tens of millions, it becomes one of the most expensive mistakes in real estate, and it's happened to experienced developers who badly misjudged how thin that buyer pool actually was. Let's run the numbers on a $40 million trophy mansion. Tier 2, the range where most of this genuinely plays out. Optimistic scenario, the market is hot and the property appreciates 6% for the year, a $2.4 million paper gain. Property tax on a home this size runs about $500,000. Insurance, given the size and location, adds another $150,000. Staffing and maintenance combined come to roughly $450,000. The owner also rents the property for 8 event or production days over the year at an average of $25,000 a day, bringing in $200,000 to offset the load. Total carrying costs after that offset, about $900,000 for the year. Net result, roughly $1.5 million ahead, almost entirely on paper, none of it spendable without borrowing against the equity or selling the property outright. Realistic scenario, the luxury market cools, and instead of appreciating, the property is flat to slightly down. Call it a 3% paper loss or $1.2 million. Carrying costs don't care what the market is doing. They're the same, roughly $1.1 million regardless. And in a softer year, the rental bookings dry up too, so there's no offset to lean on. Add those together and you're down about $2.3 million for the year compared to the optimistic case, a swing of nearly $4 million once you account for the lost rental income too, without a single dramatic event happening, just an ordinary market cooling off. For scale, that swing alone is more money than you will personally touch across your entire working life, and it's just a bad year for someone else. Then there's the scenario nobody plans for: a forced sale, divorce, a business downturn, a death in the family, something unrelated to the house itself, forces an owner to sell on a timeline they don't control. And if you actually need to sell in that environment, trophy properties routinely sit on the market for 18 to 24 months, with price cuts along the way, because the buyer pool at this price point is tiny to begin with and shrinks even further when credit gets more expensive. Owners in that position often end up selling 15% to 20% below what the property would have fetched with patience, which, on a $40 million home, is another $6 million to $8 million gone, purely for the crime of needing to sell on someone else's timeline. That's the real lesson of this business. It isn't the purchase price that gets people. It's the assumption that a mansion behaves like a normal asset, something with a clear market value you can access quickly if you need to. At this tier, it almost never does, and the owners who get hurt the worst are usually the ones who bought at the top of a cycle assuming the appreciation was guaranteed and the exit would be easy. So if you do decide to buy a mansion, remember the one number that actually determines whether it was worth it. Not the price on the listing, but the carrying cost you're signing up to pay every single year you own it, appreciation or not. Close the real estate app. You can't afford the gate, let alone the driveway behind it.